Hi, and thanks for watching this week. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday and really enjoyed yourselves with friends and family. And today we are going to get back into reading the Bible. Hopefully for 2021, you have made a commitment to come and read the Bible and follow a Bible study with me every week. So if you have, please subscribe to the channel so you can follow along. And hopefully you have been able to catch up until now. This week, we are in the chapter still of Genesis. We are in the chapter 36. We're going to try to read through 36, 37, and 38 today. 36 is going to go pretty fast because 36 is really the genealogy of some of the people that God has chosen. And it's important in the Bible for families to show the genealogy and the bloodline. Because if you go to Matthew, the book of Matthew later on in the New Testament, you will see that the very first thing that's shown in Matthew is the genealogy all the way to Jesus Christ. You can see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of those that we've already read about. Those are in the Bible. So it's important to prove the coming of the Messiah through the lineage. And that's what the whole Bible has been about, proving the lineage of Jesus Christ. So with that said, let's get in today to Genesis 36. I am reading from my King James Bible. This chapter 36 is something that we're going to go through pretty quickly because it names a lot of the names of the genealogy. So it's not really as relevant for me to go through it. You can read those for yourself. I mean, they're always important to read. You should read them. But I really want to get into 37 and 38 if we can, because they're big chapters and there's a lot going on in those chapters. So I really want to get into them. So we're just going to skim through 36 at this point. Now, these are the generations of Esau, who is in Edom. Esau took his wives of the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughters of Elon, the Hittite, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zibeon, and the Hivite, and Basmaat, Ismael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. And Adah bare to Esau Eliphath, and Bashemoth bare Ruel. And it just keeps going and going here of the lineage of Esau, the wives that he's had, the children that he's had. And let's go to verse number 6. Let's skip the other ones and let's go to 6. And it says, And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his house and his cattle and all of his beasts and all of his substance, which he had got in the land of Canaan, and went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. For their riches were more than they might dwell together, and the land wherein they were strangers could not bear them because of their cattle. Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is in Edom. Basically, this is kind of like what happened when you read back with Lot and Abraham, how they were not able to be together because they had so much, they accumulated so much wealth. So they had to separate and live on opposing sides of each other. So this is what they're trying to say here is what happened. And then it goes on in number 9. It says, And these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These are the names of Esau's son. And then they go down here, going all the way down. They name some of the sons, the wife, all of this. And then number 12, it's important to notice that they name here, and Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz Amalek. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. The Amalek is important to note here because we're going to be reading a lot about those in the future. They were adversaries to the Israelites, and they were called the Amalekites. Later on in the Bible, we will read about those. So those are important to note there. Here in my notes, it says here that Israel looked down on the Edomites because they intermingled with the Canaanites. So they weren't really too happy with hanging around those people. All right, so let's go on here. 36 continues all the way down with the genealogy, and there are a lot of the names that are there. So you can see that there was a lot of mixing there of Esau and Ishmael. Those families, they were mixed there. And then they go down into verse 31. They talk about the kings of Edom. Eventually, they start mentioning who were the kings, the people that were in power and reigned over those people. Finally, in verse 43 of chapter 36, at the end, it says, Duke Madiel, Duke Iram, these be the dukes of Edom, according to their habitations in the land of their possession. He is Esau, the father of the Edomites. And in the records, these were Israel's adversaries as well. So they talk about the Edomites and the Amalekites in this chapter, which we will read about in future chapters. All right, so let's get to chapter 37, which is a really big chapter. I have a lot of notes here that I have to read to you today. So let's get to it. Chapter 37 of Genesis. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Verse number 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So eventually he ended up working with his brothers. And remember that Joseph is the son of Rebekah, who died at childbirth when she gave birth to Benjamin. And she was the legal wife of Jacob, who he waited for because he had to marry Leah, her sister, first. So these are his favorite children because he loved her so much and he waited so long to be with Rebekah. So Joseph was his first son with Rebekah, and then Benjamin came later. Here in verse number 2, it appears that Leah and Rachel, since they had passed away, Jacob had given legal status to the concubines and made them his legal wives. And now verse number 3 says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. This is verse number 4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So let's stop here for a second and talk about verse number 3 and number 4 here. Everyone in that day, I'm reading from my notes, had a robe for warmth. They would wrap babies, they would sit on it, they would bundle up belongings for a trip, and even to secure a loan, they would use these robes. They were usually knee length, short sleeve, and plain, but Joseph's was similar to royalty, long and colorful. And it's also noted that this, because it's considered a coat, it probably had long sleeves, and that's the reason it's considered royalty, because of the sleeves. Most those days, those tunics or things they would call a robe it was more like a tunic where they didn't have any sleeves, and we just talked about that. It was like anointed for royalty. That's how special this coat was. So in this part here in verse number 4, where it says they could not speak peaceably unto him, in that day the brothers couldn't even say, peace be with you, which was the common greeting of the day. So when they're referring to that here, that was probably what they were talking about. They couldn't even say, peace be with you, because they were just so much hatred in their heart for their brother, because they knew how much the father loved him. Verse number 5, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet more. So this just stepped up the level of hate when he told them the dream. In my notes, it says that Joseph at this point is showing that he was prophetic via dreams. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But this is at the stage where he starts getting these prophetic visions, dreams and visions, unlike the past patriarchs who were getting audible signs from God, and they were having two-way conversations with God. And these dreams were known to be of a hybrid that are caused from the desires of a person and God's communication. So it's kind of like something that's manifesting inside of him, of how he sees himself, and then also God is giving him the communication how he should. So it's almost like desires that God is giving him. And Joseph dreamed, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet more. We read that. Okay, verse number 6. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. So in my notes, I wrote here that Joseph had an immature and boastful attitude. He enjoyed bragging, and it was more appropriate for him to thank God for his talents than to be bragging about it. Remember, around this time, he was about 17 years old. So he was very immature for his age. And it was possibly playing into the fact that he knew that he was one of the favorite children there. So he was probably a little too boastful with his brothers. Verse number 9. And he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brethren and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brother indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? Let's talk about verse number 10 for a second, because the first, in chapter 9, the first dream was that the brothers heard it. I'm reading from my notes. The second time, he told it to his father and his brothers. So the first time the father was not involved. Now, when you hear this part here in 10 where it says, Shall I and thy mother at this point would have been Bilhah, which was actually Rachel's handmaid, would have been the preferred concubine, because that was Rachel's concubine. And she had given Jacob the concubine to have a child with. So that is probably at this point now the legal mother of the family, the head wife of the family. Verse number 11, and his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. His brothers were envious of him, of what he was coming out of his mouth, what he was saying. But the father was pondering it, and he was thinking about it. And probably this is his favorite son. So this is probably something that he's like to have heard, that his son was feeling like royalty. Number 12, and his brethren went to feed their flocks in Shechem. So let's talk about this situation here where the brethren go to feed the flocks in Shechem. I'm reading from my notes. Their home was in Hebron, and the pasture flocks were in the surrounding area of Shechem. If you remember back, the mass murder occurred between Simeon and Levi, how they did that mass murder in the last chapter that we talked about, because of Dinah, because she was raped. So this is why they weren't exactly in Shechem, but their pasture, their animals were in the surrounding area. Verse number 13, and Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. It seemed that Jacob could have been worried because of the situation with the mass murder in the past, that he was worried for the brothers, and he wanted this son to go over there and check on things. And he volunteered very happily to go ahead and go. Because remember, there could have been a desire for vengeance at this point, and there could have been danger. So I guess he was worried about them. And that's why he sent him over there. Number 14, and he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Verse number 15, and a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? Verse number 16, and he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. Verse number 17, and the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. Now, Dothan means two wells. There were two wells there, and that's what the meaning of Dothan was. Number 18, and when they saw him far off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. Reading from my notes, this area here of Dothan was a hilly area. So if they were down in the pasture, they would have seen Joseph coming from atop the hill. They would have seen him coming, the brothers. And the brothers' jealousy had turned to ugly rage and blinded them. Reading from my notes. Bad thing about that is that jealousy can lead to serious sins when they're left unchecked, and the longer left to fester will be harder to uproot. Okay, verse number 19. And they said on one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. So Simeon and Levi, remember, they were the murderers back in the mass murder. These were the two brothers that carried out the mass murder. For them, they were able to totally be okay with the fact to hurt Joseph, because remember, they were already tainted with the hand of so many deaths that they had in the past. 20. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him. This is what I'm saying, that they can conspire to kill him because they've already done mass murder in the past. And cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. So Reuben was the oldest son. He would have been the responsible one in charge of all the other brothers. So this is not going to look good on him, because it's going to go down pretty bad when he goes back. So he was trying to mediate the situation where eventually he figured he would just come back and get Joseph out of there. Remember, he's already had problems with his father. He had a reputation with Jacob because he had slept with Bilhah. And Reuben heard, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. So he didn't want them to actually kill him. What he wanted was just to put him into a pit in the wilderness. Verse 23. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty, there was no water in it. So this is basically like a cistern, where in the desert they would have places like this where there are holes in the ground, and that's where when it rained, the cisterns were full of water, and now you had some water in the places where usually you don't have, like a lake or a stream or things like that. Number 25. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and mirth, going to carry it down to Egypt. Reading from my notes, this was an old trading route that was going to Egypt, and these were people who were coming to trade spices, and these spices were mostly used for embalming the dead. That's why it says spicery, balm, and myrrh, and these were the spices that were used for embalming. 26. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. So they didn't really want to have the sin of blood on their hands for their brother, so they decided to sell him as a slave to these Ishmaelites. Remember, these are actual Ishmaelites. This is from Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael was the son of Abraham, and those are the lineage that they sold the brother to. This is verse 28. Then there passed by Midianites merchant, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph unto Egypt. When you say Ishmaelites, you're including all of them, but when you say Midianites, you're specific to a certain region in that area. This wasn't it was not an easy trip. This was a 30-day journey through the desert, and Joseph would be, I'm reading from my notes, he would be chained and on foot. He would be treated badly and sold as merchandise when they arrived to Egypt. Verse 29, and Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. So when it means he rent his clothes, that means he tore his garment as a sign of mourning when he saw that his brother wasn't in the pit. 30, and he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? He is wondering, basically asking, what will happen to me? Because he knew that this was going to be super bad on him. He was responsible for the brothers and what they did. He was more concerned about himself than over his father, basically. 31, and they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. 32, and they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." You notice how they keep talking about the many colors of the coat, because there's no doubt that this was the coat, the anointed coat, that it was like a royalty coat. And there's no doubt about it that it was just not any other coat that they could have gotten somewhere. No, this was the precise coat. It was known that Jacob had given Joseph. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. And verse 36 reads, "And the Midianites sold him in Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard." Sackcloth in verse 34 was burlap, which was used for signs of mourning. It was like basically wearing black, like we do today for mourning. We wear black. The sackcloth was what people wore when they were in mourning. And Joseph experienced probably a culture shock in Egypt. I'm reading from my notes. And he lived as a countryside nomad. Now he goes into Egypt, where there was spiritual blindness because they worshipped several gods there. So this is a whole different type of world for him that he's going into. Let's talk for a second about Potiphar. Potiphar was a common name in Egypt, found in many Egyptian monuments. This is from my notes. For several dynasties. It means the word means dedicated to Ra, and Ra was Egyptian for sun god. He was one of the most powerful men in Egypt at that time, and he could have been considered part of the military as well. So after Pharaoh, he was like the second in command. That was chapter 37. We're going to go on now. Chapter 38 is a little bit different. The whole story kind of changes right here. There's this whole different shift in the story. We're not going to be talking about Joseph anymore, but we're going to be talking about Joseph in the next chapter and the next week. But this 38 goes into a whole different thing. So let's get into that now. This is chapter 38. "And it came to pass that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned in to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan." Let's talk about verse number 2. I want you to know that it's important to know that Judah, mentioned here in verse number 2, is a direct descendant of Jesus Christ. And then we're going to go further down, and we're also going to read about another descendant of Jesus Christ. "And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah, and he was at Shesib when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar." Now Tamar is also mentioned in the Bible as a direct descendant to Jesus Christ. And I want to talk a little bit. I want to give you some notes here that I wrote that are really good. It's important to know that this gospel, the Old Testament and the New Testament links, show us how Jesus fulfilled old prophecy. So notice that in Matthew, if you go to Matthew 1, you will notice that there are only 4 women mentioned in the genealogy. There were 4 that were mentioned, but these were 2 were not. There were 2 that were not Israelites by birth, and all 4. So this is one of them because she was a Canaanite. And all 4 had a reputation, reading from my notes, that should have been made them unmentioned in the ancestral tree. This was the line God sent for his Savior. This is important because you have to understand these women had a bad reputation, and they were chosen women. They were even included in the genealogy. And these were the descendants of Jesus Christ. So the moral of this story is that no matter the sins of the people, God's plan continued to unfold, and it includes you also. So it's important for us to read the Bible and understand these things from the Bible, that God chooses people that are sinners. And he doesn't care, because you can come to full repentance. So let's go on with the story. Now that we know that Tamar did a really great sin, we're going to find out exactly how sinful she was. Verse number 7, and Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. It doesn't tell us how wicked was, which was Judah's firstborn. It doesn't tell us that. Number 8, and Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. This was verse number 8. It says, and from my notes it says, sons marrying the brother's widow was a custom at that time. It was vital that family bloodlines carried on in I think it said Levirate marriage, which if they didn't marry, the woman would have no inheritance. So that was the reason why everything was kept in the family. So now the brother had the obligation to marry the dead brother's wife and carry on that inheritance to her for her children. Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. He didn't want to have children with her, basically. He did not want to have children with her. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. That was the way that he was supposed to protect the lineage and the inheritance. So God was mad and didn't accept that. Verse number 11. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah, my son, be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. She's waiting for this child to become of age so that she can marry him and be a part of this Levirate marriage so she can gain the inheritance. Verse number 12. In the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep shears to Timnah, he and his friend Hira, the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So at this point, the child is already big. She's been waiting to marry this child, and she notices that they never brought her the child to marry. Verse number 15, when Judah saw her, he thought her to be an harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? So she's asking for money up front. She wants something in return for this exchange. This is going to be in sensual deception right now, what we're going through here. Now, before we go on, prostitutes were common in the pagan cultures. They served Canaan goddesses in religious cults. This is from my notes. Fornication was encouraged to improve fertility in crops and flocks. God condemned it as a serious sin. Verse number 17, and he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? So she wasn't going to be no fool. He said, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you a goat. She wanted something now to prove, this is your payment. She wasn't going to take, it's like you don't want to take a check if you're a prostitute. This is verse 18. He said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it her and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. All right, let's talk about this. What are these signets and bracelets and staff? This is the identification seal that was used for legal documents, carved in stone for a ring or a necklace, and inseparable to owner. Had a mark of clay or beeswax in it, and everyone was different. So this was his particular sign and symbol, and if you had that, you knew that it belonged to this person. So verse number 19, and she arose and went away and laid by her veil from her and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. So he came, so she left after they slept together, and he gave her this proof that it was him. She left, and he came back to bring her the kid so that he can get back his identification seal, but she wasn't there. In verse 21, then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. 22, and he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. 23, and Judah said, let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told to Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. So in those days, if you were a prostitute, you should have been burnt, because you were so sinful that you did something like that. 25, when she was brought forth, she said to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are am I with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet and the bracelets and the staff. So this was the proof that she had, that it was him that she had the child with. So she deceived this man incredibly. And Judah acknowledged them. This is verse 26, and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son. And he knew her again no more. So they didn't sleep together after that, but he realized that she was in the right standing because he didn't do his end of the bargain, so she had to cover for herself. If you see, this family had a common sense of family deception. Let me just read a little bit here. So from Judah would come the Jewish people eventually, and the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Abraham was his great-grandfather. Judah was Jacob's fourth son. This is verse 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. 28. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. So what happened was, they were twins, but the one that was behind the other one put his hand out, and he became the legal firstborn. So this is why they put a scarlet thread on the hand, because that was very big in that day, whoever came out of the womb first. So it wasn't the first one, it was the second one, because the second one put his hand out. So he would have the legal title of firstborn. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zara. So we're going to leave it here. This was a very interesting chapter. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this chapter of Genesis. Next week, we're going to get into chapter 39, when we get into Joseph, when he is inside of Potiphar's house, and probably get into also verse 40. And it gets super interesting at this point. If you need prayer requests, please leave it down below. And don't forget that it's important for us to remember that the Bible is about Jesus Christ, and all the things that God speaks to us about comes through his word. And I hope that you take these stories today and understand that there's a lot of people that God has chosen that are sinners, and we're all sinners, and we can all come to repentance, and we can be chosen by God as well. So I thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a lovely week. God bless all of you. Bye-bye.